The silence that followed Helena Madero's last words that night wasn't just an absence of sound. It was the moment a room full of powerful people realized they had completely underestimated the woman who'd served their drinks for the past 3 months. But to understand the magnitude of that moment, we need to go back to the beginning, when Helena still carried the weight of 5 years of humiliation and injustice on her shoulders. It was a Monday morning when Helena first stepped onto the polished marble floors of the Alencar mansion. Her simple shoes, carefully cleaned the night before, echoed timidly through the ornate hallways adorned with artwork worth more than she'd earn in a decade. The interview for the housekeeper position had been quick and uncomfortable. Claudio Alencar had observed her with the disdain reserved for those he considered naturally inferior. "You seem too educated for this job," he'd said, adjusting the Swiss watch on his wrist. "I hope you don't have any grand aspirations. Here, you'll clean, you'll serve, and most importantly, you'll know your place." Helena lowered her eyes, not out of submission, but to hide the spark of determination that shone within. "Yes, sir, I need this opportunity very much." What Claudio didn't know was that every condescending word that left his mouth only strengthened Helena's resolve. She had studied his routine for months, knew his habits, his vices, his weaknesses. She knew he enjoyed humiliating staff in front of important guests, that his arrogance blinded him to the possibility that those around him might be more than they appeared. During the first few days, Helena played her part perfectly. She cleaned silently, served meals efficiently, and endured Claudio's scornful comments as if she were deaf. But at night, in her small room at the back of the property, she reviewed documents, made notes, and planned every move of her true mission. Memories of the past always visited her during the quietest hours. She saw herself again at 15, walking through the halls of the Brazilian embassy in Berlin, where her father, Antonio Medeiros, served as a diplomat. He was an upright, respected man who dedicated his life to public service with unwavering honor. Helena had grown up among languages and cultures, absorbing knowledge like a sponge, always proud of the father who had raised her to see the world with curious eyes and an open mind. "Daughter," Antonio used to say as they reviewed diplomatic reports together, "true power lies not in humiliating others, but in lifting up those who need support. Always remember that." Helena remembered the smell of strong coffee lingering in her father's study, the afternoons she helped him translate complex documents, the patient way he explained the nuances of international relations. These were precious moments that had shaped not only her intelligence, but her compassion. Everything changed one winter morning in 2018. Helena was finishing her degree in international relations when she received the call that shattered her reality. Her father had been accused of corruption, of facilitating fraudulent contracts between Brazilian companies and European partners. The evidence was too convincing, meticulously organized to incriminate a man who would never accept a penny in exchange for favors. "It's a setup, Helena," were the last coherent words she heard from her father before depression consumed him completely. "Someone used me as a scapegoat. Find out who." The official investigation was swift and merciless. Antonio Medeiros was removed from his post, his reputation destroyed, his career annihilated. Helena watched, helpless, as the man she most admired in the world withered before her eyes, consumed by the injustice and shame of an accusation he could never clear. He died 2 years later, still officially under investigation, carrying to his last breath the pain of being betrayed by a system he had faithfully served. Helena held his hand as he passed, whispering a promise to uncover the truth and restore his honor. That's when her own investigation began. She scoured documents, followed financial trails, spoke with her father's former colleagues who still believed in his innocence. Gradually, one name began to appear with suspicious frequency: Claudio Alencar, a Brazilian businessman who had made a fortune precisely from the European contracts that destroyed her father's life. The connections became clear over time. Claudio had used Antonio's position to legitimize his shady dealings, and when European authorities began to investigate, he preempted them, planting evidence that directed all the blame onto the upright diplomat who would never suspect betrayal. Helena spent months planning her approach. She knew she couldn't simply accuse Claudio without irrefutable proof. He was rich, influential, protected by a network of powerful contacts. She needed a more subtle, more intelligent strategy. She needed to be inside his house, observe his movements, find the evidence that would restore her father's honor. The opportunity arose when she learned that Claudio was looking for a new housekeeper. Helena built a false identity, hid her university education, her language skills, her true history. In the eyes of everyone, she became just another young woman who needed work to survive. For the first 3 months in the mansion, Helena observed everything. She noted the documents Claudio left scattered around his office when he felt secure, the phone calls in foreign languages he thought no one understood, the discreet meetings with men in suits who whispered about the diplomatic problem from a few years ago being definitely buried. Every word she heard was like a stab in the chest, confirming her suspicions about her father's deliberate destruction. But Helena had learned to control her emotions, to transform pain into fuel for her determination. The moment that would change everything began to unfold on a Thursday afternoon when Helena overheard Claudio talking on the phone about an important dinner happening at the weekend. "It'll be German businessmen," he said, in that arrogant tone Helena had learned to hate. "They want to review the old contracts, make sure there are no more diplomatic complications. I'll show them everything is under control." Helena's heart pounded. She knew this was the moment. Claudio, in his infinite arrogance, had created the perfect opportunity for his own downfall. On the night of the dinner party, Helena prepared with the meticulous care of a soldier before battle. She wore her simple maid's uniform, her hair in a discreet bun, but beneath the apparent simplicity, her mind was as sharp as a knife. The mansion was at its peak splendor. Claudio had invested a small fortune in the decor, the food, the wine, all to impress the German visitors and solidify the deals that, Helena knew, were built on the ashes of her father's reputation. The guests arrived punctually. Besides the 3 German businessmen, Claudio had invited other Brazilian magnates, creating an atmosphere of power and influence that fueled his insatiable ego. Helena served the initial cocktails with the invisibility she had perfected over the months. She listened to snippets of conversation, picking up nuances that went unnoticed by others. Her diplomatic training, hidden for so long, resurfaced naturally. During dinner, Claudio was particularly animated, recounting stories of his great achievements in international business. Helena felt nauseous listening to him boast about successes built on the destruction of good men like her father. It was then that one of the Germans, Herr Müller, commented on the importance of reliability in international business, specifically mentioning problems they had had in the past with corrupt diplomats. "Oh, but that was resolved a long time ago," Claudio replied with a smile that Helena recognized as the one he always used when he was about to humiliate someone. Speaking of communication issues, Claudio looked directly at Helena, who was serving the wine. His eyes gleamed with anticipated malice. "Helena, come here for a moment." She approached, maintaining the submissive posture she had cultivated for months. "Yes, sir." "Our German guests brought some important documents," Claudio said, picking up a briefcase from the table. "How about you read this contract aloud for us? I'm sure our friends would appreciate hearing how we Brazilians strive to understand their business." An awkward silence settled over the room. The German guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly perceiving the cruelty of the situation. Claudio, however, seemed ecstatic with his own wickedness. Helena looked at the document. It was a complex commercial contract filled with technical terms in German. Exactly the kind of trap Claudio loved to set for his employees. "Mr. Alvarez," murmured one of the Brazilians present, "perhaps it's not necessary." "Nonsense," Claudio interrupted, slapping his hand on the table. "Helena is a smart girl. I'm sure she can at least try. Isn't that right, Helena?" It was at that moment that Helena made the decision she had been postponing for months. She looked into Claudio's eyes, saw all the arrogance and cruelty that had destroyed her father, and knew it was time to end it. "Of course, Mr. Alvarez," she replied, with a calmness that surprised even herself. "It will be a pleasure." Helena took the document and examined it quickly. It was a standard supply contract, nothing particularly complex for someone with her background. She took a deep breath and began to read. "Vertrag über die Lieferung von technischen Ausrüstungen zwischen der Alenka-Industrie und der Müller und Associates GmbH." Her voice was clear, precise, with the perfect pronunciation of someone who had lived years in Germany. She continued reading, simultaneously translating the most technical terms, explaining the legal nuances with a fluency that left everyone in the room speechless. The silence that followed was deafening. Claudio was pale, his mouth open in an expression of absolute shock. The German guests looked at each other with growing admiration, while the Brazilians seemed unable to believe what they had just witnessed. "Hervorragend!" exclaimed Herr Müller, clapping his hands. "Perfect! Your German is impeccable. Miss, where did you learn to speak like that?" Helena carefully folded the document and returned it to the table. Then, for the first time in months, she raised her eyes and looked Claudio directly in the eyes. "I grew up in Germany, Mr. Müller. My father was a diplomat, and I spent my adolescence at the Brazilian embassy in Berlin. I am fluent in German, English, French, Italian, and Spanish. I have a degree in international relations from the University of Brasilia." The revelation fell on the table like a bomb. Claudio looked like he had seen a ghost, his face oscillating between deathly white and the red of rage. The guests murmured among themselves, clearly intrigued. But what are you doing here?" asked one of the Brazilians, genuinely confused. Helena took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I am here," she said, with a dignity her father would be proud to see, "because my father was Antonio Diaz, a Brazilian diplomat who served with honor for 25 years, until he was falsely accused of corruption in 2018. The name echoed through the room like thunder. Several guests remembered the case, which had been widely reported at the time. Claudio paled even further, if that were possible. "My father died 2 years ago," continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, carrying a guilt that wasn't his. "He was used as a scapegoat to protect the truly corrupt. And I am here to prove his innocence." Herr Müller frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Miss Diaz, if I'm not mistaken, the Diaz case was related to our previous contracts with Brazilian companies. Exactly," Helena interrupted. "Contracts facilitated by companies like Alenka Industries, which used my father's position to legitimize questionable business and then sacrificed him when the investigations began." Claudio finally regained his voice, although it came out as a growl. "These are absurd accusations. You're an unbalanced maid who interrupted, pulling a folder from her apron, of documents proving suspicious fund transfers, internal emails from Alenka Industries discussing how to pin the blame on the diplomat, and recordings of phone conversations you made thinking no one understood German." The ensuing silence was absolute. Helena had spent months gathering evidence, using her position in the house to access information Claudio never imagined anyone could understand.
During these 3 months, she continued, I listened to phone conversations where you boasted about eliminating the Maderos problem. I saw documents in your office detailing how the evidence was planted. I have everything recorded, photographed, documented. Herr Mueller rose, clearly disturbed. Mr. Alvarez, if these accusations are true, it completely changes our perspective on previous contracts. We would never agree to do business with someone who— It's lies, Claudio shouted, rising abruptly. She's an intruder, a spy. No, Helena said, her calm a brutal contrast to Claudio's desperation. I'm the daughter of an honorable man who was destroyed by your greed, and now I have the proof to clear his name and expose the truth about your business methods.
At this point in our journey, dear readers, following these stories of overcoming adversity and justice, it's worth reflecting on how truth, however long it takes to emerge, always finds its way to the light. If you were moved by Helena's courage so far, be sure to follow our page to discover more inspiring stories like this. One of the Brazilian guests, a businessman Helena recognized as a longtime rival of Claudio's, couldn't hide a satisfied smile. Well, this is unexpected. Claudio tried to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. His mask of superiority had fallen, and everyone in the room could see the small, cruel man hiding behind the facade of success. You can't believe this. This extraordinarily qualified woman you completely underestimated, Herr Mueller finished, his tone icy. Mr. Alvarez, I think our meeting is over. We will be re-evaluating all our contracts with your company. The Germans rose in unison, clearly prepared to end any business dealings with Claudio. The other guests also began to say their goodbyes, many of them looking at Helena with a mixture of admiration and respect. Miss Diaz, Herr Mueller said before leaving, if you ever want to resume your diplomatic career or need professional recommendations, don't hesitate to contact us. People like you are rare in the business world. Helena thanked him with the grace she had learned from her father. When all the guests had left, she found herself alone in the dining room with Claudio, who looked like he had aged 10 years in one night. You destroyed everything, he muttered, more to himself than to her. No, Helena replied, gathering her things. You destroyed everything when you chose to sacrifice good men to protect your interests. I merely brought the truth to light. Claudio looked at her with a mixture of hatred and something she didn't expect to see, reluctant respect. What do you want from me? He finally asked. I want you to publicly confess what you did to my father. I want you to admit that the evidence against him was planted. I want Antonio Diaz's name cleared forever. And if I refuse? Helena smiled, and for the first time since entering that house, it was a genuine smile. Then I will hand over all the evidence I've collected to the appropriate authorities and the press. Your choice. Claudio knew he had no options. The evidence Helena had collected would be enough not only to destroy his reputation, but possibly result in serious legal consequences. You planned all this, he said with bitter admiration, from day one. From the day my father died knowing he was innocent but unable to prove it, Helena corrected. He taught me that patience and intelligence overcome arrogance and cruelty. It took time, but he was right. 3 weeks later, Claudio Alvarez gave a press conference confessing his role in the scandal that had destroyed Antonio Diaz's career. The evidence presented by Helena was irrefutable, and the confession completely restored the diplomat's posthumous reputation. Helena was at the cemetery where her father was buried, placing fresh flowers on the grave when she received the call that would change her life again. Miss Diaz, this is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We would like to talk to you about the possibility of resuming the diplomatic career your father so much wanted you to pursue. She looked at Antonio Diaz's headstone, which now read, "Upright diplomat, devoted father, man of honor." The stains of injustice had been erased forever. "Yes," she replied, feeling a genuine peace for the first time in years. "I would very much like to talk about that." 6 months later, Helena Diaz walked the halls of the Brazilian embassy in London as the youngest cultural attaché in recent diplomatic history. Her first official act was to frame a photo of her father on her desk, next to a quote he used to repeat: "The truth may be buried, but it never dies." Claudio Alvarez lost most of his international contracts and was forced to sell the mansion where Helena had worked as a maid. Ironically, he ended up learning a valuable lesson about humility, not through humiliation, but through the understanding that he had wasted years of his life underestimating the people around him. In a strange twist of fate, Claudio sought out Helena a few months after his public confession. They met in a simple cafe, far from the marble palaces where they had first met. "I wanted to apologize," he said, without the arrogant air she remembered. "Not only for what I did to your father, but for what I did to you. And I wanted to thank you." Helena raised her eyes, surprised. "Thank you? You could have completely destroyed me. You could have humiliated me, as I humiliated so many others. But you chose to seek only the truth. That made me rethink many things." Helena studied the face of the man who had been her adversary for so long. She saw in him, for the first time, something like genuine reflection. "My father always said that revenge destroys both those who seek it and those who receive it," she replied. "I didn't want revenge, I wanted justice. And justice, when true, can teach instead of just punishing." Claudio nodded, seeming to understand. "What you did that night was masterful, but it was also compassionate. You could have exposed me in a far more cruel way. Cruelty was your method, not mine," said Helena. "I learned from my father that true strength lies in lifting up, not in tearing down." As they left the cafe, Claudio offered his hand to Helena. "I hope that one day you can fully forgive me." Helena shook his hand. "Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once. It's something you build with actions, day by day." "But I believe people can change, Mr. Alvarez. My father believed that too." Years passed. Helena built a brilliant diplomatic career, always guided by the principles she had learned from her father. She became an expert in international conflict mediation, using her personal experience with injustice to help others find paths to reconciliation. Claudio, in turn, completely transformed his approach to business. He created a foundation to support the families of diplomats and public officials facing unjust accusations. It wasn't a way to completely redeem himself, but it was a start. One spring afternoon, 5 years after that transformative night at the Alvarez mansion, Helena received an unexpected letter. It was from Herr Müller, the German businessman who had witnessed her revelation. "Dear Ambassador Diaz," he wrote, "I am writing to inform you that our company is establishing a scholarship program for young people from developing countries interested in diplomatic careers. We would like to call it the Antonio Diaz Scholarship Program, in honor of your father and the values he represented. We hope you will accept to be our first official speaker." Helena smiled, remembering her father's words about how a person can positively impact the world. Antonio Diaz had died believing his life had been a failure, but his daughter had proven that his legacy of integrity would continue to influence future generations. That night, Helena called her mother, who had moved to the countryside after her husband's death, still wounded by the injustice they had suffered. "Mom," Helena said, "I have some news for you. Dad is going to have a scholarship program with his name on it. Young people from all over the world will learn about diplomacy and integrity carrying Antonio Diaz's name." She heard her mother cry on the other end of the line, but they were tears of joy and pride. "Your father always said you would be special, Helena. He knew you would do extraordinary things. No, Mom, he did extraordinary things. I was just lucky to be his daughter and learn from his example. Everything I've achieved is because he taught me that truth, patience, and compassion are more powerful than any wealth or influence. When she hung up the phone, Helena went out to the balcony of her London apartment. The city stretched out before her, millions of lives intertwined, each carrying its own struggles, its own hopes, its own possibilities for redemption and transformation. She thought about the journey that had brought her there, from the young woman shattered by the injustice suffered by her father to the respected diplomat she was today. She thought about how the humiliation planned by Claudio that night had become the moment of her greatest victory. She thought about how arrogance and cruelty, when confronted with dignity and truth, reveal their own weakness. But mostly, she thought about her father and how proud he would be to know that his death had not been in vain, that his integrity had planted seeds that would flourish far beyond his own existence. Helena took a deep breath, feeling for the first time in her adult life a complete peace. She had honored her father's memory. She had found justice without sacrificing her own humanity. She had transformed pain into purpose and humiliation into triumph. The next morning, she would begin working on the inaugural speech for the Antonio Diaz Scholarship Program. She would speak to young people from all over the world about how true nobility does not come from birth or wealth, but from the choices we make when no one is looking, about how patience and intelligence can defeat the most powerful arrogance, about how, sometimes, the greatest victory is the one that transforms not only our own lives, but also the lives of those who have wronged us. And when she finished her speech, Helena knew she would feel her father's presence beside her, proud of the daughter who had learned his most important lessons, that dignity is unbreakable, that truth always prevails, and that love can triumph over hate, even when it seems impossible. Helena Diaz's story became legend in diplomatic circles, not only for the ingenuity of her strategy or the justice of her cause, but for the way she had chosen to seek the truth. She had proven that it is possible to win without becoming what we fight, that it is possible to seek justice without losing oneself in the thirst for revenge. Years later, when young diplomats asked her about that night at the Alvarez mansion, Helena always ended her answer the same way. My father taught me that our true measure is not in what we do when we are admired, but in what we do when we are underestimated. That night, I simply chose to honor his teachings. And so, the planned humiliation had indeed become poetic justice. Not through the destruction of the opponent, but through the revelation that quiet dignity and patient truth are ultimately the most powerful forces in the world. Arrogance had met its cruelest mirror, the compassionate wisdom of one who carries the light even in the deepest darkness. From that day on, nothing was ever the same. For Helena, for Claudio, and for everyone who witnessed the moment when a simple maid revealed herself to be the daughter of an honored diplomat, proving that true power lies not in humiliating others, but in uplifting oneself through truth, justice, and unwavering compassion.